Lonely Rancher
Please, let me
saved a
help you.
wounded woman from being raped, then found
What happened?
justice for her. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to subscribe and like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The Texas sun was sinking low, bleeding its last light across the scrub and rock-strewn hills. Daniel Carter reined in his horse, eyes scanning the ground for the faint signs of stolen cattle. Dust clung to his boots, the air dry enough to crack a man's throat. He was used to silence out here, the kind that pressed heavy on a man's shoulders. But what broke that silence now wasn't the cry of a hawk or the shuffle of cattle. It was weeping, faint, trembling, like the sound of someone's soul coming apart. Daniel froze in the saddle, every muscle tight. His hand slid toward the worn colt at his hip, a habit too ingrained to think about. The sound drifted again, carried on the evening wind, from a grove of mesquite trees twisted in the half-light. He dismounted quietly, boots crunching gravel, and stepped forward. The closer he came, the heavier the sobs pressed on him, until he saw her, crumpled at the base of a boulder, her figure small against the endless land. A young woman, Apache. Her buckskin dress was torn, the pale leather darkened with blood and dirt. Long black hair hung in tangles over her face, streaked with dust and broken leaves. She looked less like a person than a broken doll tossed aside by cruel hands. At the scrape of his boot on stone, her head shot up, eyes wide, wild, black with terror. She tried to push herself backward, but her arms shook too hard, her body too battered to obey. "Please," her voice rasped like it had been stolen from her throat. "Just make it quick. Don't make it last." Daniel stopped cold, the words cutting into him sharper than any blade. She thought he meant to finish what others had already done. He raised his empty hands slowly, palms open, letting the colt hang forgotten at his side. "No, miss," he said, voice low and steady, as though gentling a spooked horse. "I ain't here to hurt you. I came because I heard you crying." She stared at him, her chest heaving, torn between disbelief and dread. Her arms were bruised, her neck bore cruel marks of struggle. More than wounds, though, was the emptiness in her eyes, the way fear had swallowed the very spirit in her. "My name's Daniel Carter," he continued, setting his hat down in the dirt as if laying down arms. "I give you my word before God, no harm will come from me, not tonight, not ever." Daniel stayed where he was, hat in the dirt, hands lifted slightly away from his sides. He knew one wrong move could break whatever thin thread held her there instead of running or dying trying. Her lips trembled as she whispered again, barely audible. "They hurt me." The confession, raw and broken, carried more weight than any shouted accusation. Daniel felt a heat rise in his chest, not from the Texas sun, but from rage, a fire that threatened to consume his calm. He pressed it down. Fury wouldn't help her now. "I know," he said gently, "and I'm sorry. What they did was evil." He let his words settle into the air like the dust around them. "But I swear to you, miss, those men will answer for it. That's a promise." Her eyes darted over him, boots, coat, revolver at his hip, the marks of a white man she had every reason to fear. Her body shivered so hard he could hear her teeth clicking. When he took one slow step closer, she flinched and tried to crawl, collapsing again against the stone. "All right," Daniel said quickly, stopping. "I won't touch you without your say-so." He knelt down on one knee, careful to keep distance, and pulled a clean bandana from his pocket. Setting it on the ground between them, he slid his canteen beside it. "Water," he explained softly, "and cloth for the blood. Yours to take, not mine to give." For a long moment she didn't move, only stared as if unsure whether kindness itself was a trick. Then, with trembling fingers, she dragged the canteen closer. She lifted it awkwardly, spilling half down her front before the rest touched her lips. When she coughed, Daniel nearly reached for her, but stopped. letting her fight her way through it on her own terms. "That's it," he murmured. "You're safe to drink. Take your time." Her breath steadied a fraction. Voice hoarse, she asked, "Why? Why help me?" The question pierced him. 100 answers pressed to be spoken, but the truth came out simple. "Because it's right. Because no woman deserves what was done to you. And because my mama raised me to believe the Lord keeps us closest when we're broken." For the first time, her wild eyes flickered with something other than fear. Confusion, maybe, or the faintest spark of hope. "My name," she whispered, as though speaking it meant reclaiming herself. "Elena. Elena Nanton." Daniel gave a small nod, his voice steady. "That's a fine name. I'll remember it. And, Elena," he touched the brim of his hat on the ground, like a vow, "while I breathe, no one will lay another hand on you." The wind stirred through the mesquite branches, carrying away the last light of the sun. And in that broken grove, beneath shadows stretching long across Texas soil, a wounded Apache girl and a weary cowboy stood at the edge of a story neither could yet imagine. One born from sorrow, but not destined to end there. To continue this adventure, please subscribe to our channel. It helps us keep creating. The cabin stood quiet at the edge of the valley, smoke curling from the stone chimney into the Texas dusk. Inside, Elena Nanton sat pressed against the far wall, knees drawn to her chest, her eyes fixed on the barred door as though any moment it might burst open. She had accepted the bedroom only because Daniel insisted it was hers alone. He had pointed to the heavy oak bar across the door, to the shotgun waiting within reach. "If anyone tries to come in, even me, you fire first," he had said, and then he left her. Still, her hands trembled against the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Every sound beyond those four walls, the creak of the rafters, the scrape of wind against shutters, pulled her back to the mesquite grove. She heard laughter that wasn't there, boots stomping across the dirt floor that never moved. When the branch outside clawed at the window, she gasped, breath quickening until the room blurred. In the barn, Daniel heard the muffled cries. He set down his lantern, his jaw tightening. Every night it was the same, her terror cutting through the dark like a wounded animal. He wanted to storm in, to take the fear from her with sheer will, but he knew better. Healing couldn't be forced. So instead, he stacked firewood against the chill, leaving enough noise that she would know where he was, without ever crossing the line she had drawn. Morning came pale and dry. Daniel found the plate he had left on the porch scraped clean, the bandages missing from the bundle. It was all the proof he needed. She was still fighting to survive. He knelt beside the herbs she had scattered days before, plucking one stalk of sage, its gray-green leaves crumbling between his fingers. When he set it quietly on the porch, he saw the faintest movement through the window curtain. A shadow lingered, watching. Inside, Elena touched the sage as though it were the hand of her grandmother. "Good for cleansing wounds," she whispered in Apache, voice rough but steady. Her grandmother had taught her each root and leaf, every medicine the desert gave. She remembered the old woman's hands, strong and sure, grinding blossoms into paste, whispering prayers of balance. For a moment, memory pressed against fear. Daniel didn't hear the words, but he saw her lips move, her fingers tracing the herb with reverence. Something shifted in his chest. This woman wasn't only a victim abandoned in the dust. She carried knowledge older than the cabin he built, older than the fence lines that cut the prairie. As the sun slipped westward, Daniel spoke through the door, keeping his voice calm, steady as the slow beat of hooves. "I'll be checking the horses now. You've got your room to yourself, and I'll be back before dark. No one's coming for you tonight." There was no reply, only silence, then the soft scrape of the bar sliding deeper into its notch. Yet Daniel caught it as he turned away, the faint rustle of movement inside, like someone daring to breathe a little easier. The storm broke just after midnight. Thunder rolled across the valley like cannon fire, the kind Daniel had heard long ago in the war. Lightning carved white scars across the sky, rattling the shutters and setting the cabin beams to groaning. Rain hammered the roof, drowning out every other sound of the night. Daniel was in the barn, rubbing down his gelding, when he heard the frantic pounding at the cabin door. He dropped the brush and hurried through the downpour. Elena stood there, soaked through, hair plastered to her face, eyes wide with terror. Her hands gripped the doorframe as though it were the only thing keeping her upright. "Please," she gasped over the thunder. I can't be alone." Daniel's heart clenched. For days she had barely spoken, retreating behind walls of silence. Now those walls were cracking under the storm's fury. He stepped back, motioning her inside. "Then you won't be," he said simply. She sank into a chair by the fire, clutching a blanket around her shoulders. But the storm mocked the fragile warmth, every crash of thunder pulling a shudder from her body. She pressed her palms to her ears, whispering broken fragments. "Their voices, they're laughing again." Daniel settled across from her, careful to keep space. He studied the flames, steady and calm, then spoke over the roar outside. "I built this cabin myself. Nearly lost the roof twice before I learned how to brace it right. Storm can rage all it wants, but these walls will hold. You're safe here." Still she trembled, her gaze unfocused, lost to memories stronger than reason. Words alone weren't reaching her, so Daniel did the only thing left. He began to sing. It was an old hymn, one his mother had sung on nights when thunder shook their farmhouse. His voice was rough, not made for music, but the melody carried warmth. Slow, steady, a thread of light through the dark. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound! He sang softly, almost to himself, but the notes found her where words had failed. Elena's rocking slowed. Her breathing evened, as though she were listening not to the storm, but to something older, gentler. She lifted her eyes to him, the firelight catching the tears that clung there. "Your mother sang that?" Daniel nodded, voice low. Said it reminded her that no storm lasts forever, that God's mercy is bigger than any thunder. For a long moment, the only sound was rain on the roof. Then Elena whispered, almost to herself, "My grandmother, she sang prayers too. Different words, same meaning." Daniel's chest tightened. 2 worlds, 2 songs, yet both reaching for the same comfort. He let the silence rest, the storm raging outside, but no longer holding her hostage. When at last thunder rolled without shaking her, Elena drew the blanket tighter and leaned back in the chair. For the first time since he found her, her eyes closed in something close to peace. Daniel kept watch by the fire, humming the hymn's refrain, a sentinel against the storm within and without. The storm passed by dawn, leaving the land washed clean, the air sharp with the scent of wet earth and mesquite. Daniel brewed coffee on the stove, while Elena lingered near the hearth, wrapped in the blanket. She hadn't spoken since the night before, but her eyes were clearer, watching him with a cautious curiosity. "Storm always feels bigger at night," he said, pouring the black liquid into a tin cup. He set it on the table and stepped back. "Morning light makes it smaller somehow." Elena hesitated, then rose slowly to take the cup. She cradled it between both hands, sipping as though testing the warmth before trusting it. After a moment she whispered, "My grandmother said storms are spirits, cleansing the earth. She prayed after each one, to thank them for what they left behind." Daniel studied her, hearing something in her tone, faith, not unlike his mother's, though spoken in a different tongue. "Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman." Elena's lips trembled into the ghost of a smile. She was. She carried medicine roots and blossoms, knew how to heal sickness. The council called on her to speak when white men came with their papers. They trusted her to keep peace. Silence stretched, broken only by the crackle of firewood. Daniel leaned against the table, arms folded. Peace didn't hold. Her eyes dropped, shadowed with grief. No, she died last winter. Without her, the voices for peace grew weak. The young ones, they only see war. Daniel's chest tightened. Memories flickered sharp as broken glass. A farmhouse in flames, the sound of rifles in the night. His sister's cry cut short. He swallowed hard. War's all I ever saw from your people. Apache raiders came down on our place 10 years back, took everything from me. Elena stiffened, her fingers tightening on the cup. And yet, you saved me. Daniel's jaw worked. Because what happened to my family was war. What happened to you wasn't. War has rules, ugly as it is. But what those men did? He shook his head, eyes hard. That was just evil. Elena looked at him then, really looked, as though weighing every word. Most white men don't see the difference. To them, we are all the same. Then most white men are blind, Daniel replied, his voice steady. He pushed away from the table, pacing once before stopping to meet her gaze again. I don't claim to understand your people, but I know wrong when I see it, and I know you didn't deserve any of it. The fire popped, sending sparks upward. Elena's shoulders loosened slightly, though her eyes still carried storms of their own. My grandmother used to say, she murmured, healing begins when an enemy becomes human to you. Maybe this is where mine begins. Daniel let out a slow breath. Something in him shifted too, less burden, less bitterness, though the old scars still ached. He nodded once, firm. Then we'll start here. It was the third evening since the storm. The air outside smelled of dust and cedar smoke, but inside the cabin the weight of silence pressed heavy. Elena sat at the edge of the bed, blanket drawn over her knees, staring into the fire as if searching its embers for courage. Daniel poured water into a basin, setting it near her without a word. He had learned not to press. Still, he felt her tension thick as rope, and tonight something in her seemed ready to break. They left me there, she said suddenly, her voice low, brittle. Her hands tightened on the blanket. 3 men. Daniel froze, then slowly set aside the tin cup. He turned toward her, careful not to crowd the space. Tell me what you can, only what you can bear. Her eyes flickered with pain, but also with a strange steadiness. The oldest, gray in his beard, scars across his hands. He was their leader. He laughed while the others, her voice faltered, breaking into silence. She swallowed hard. One had hair the color of fire, freckles on his face. He spoke different, an accent, not from here. The third was young, thin, his eyes always looking around like he expected to be caught. He was afraid, even while he... Daniel's jaw clenched, rage burning beneath his ribs. He forced it down, listening as every word carved itself into memory. They said things. Elena's tone grew harder, anger sparking under grief. About other women, Apache, Mexican, whoever they found. Said I was only the latest, that no one would believe me, that no one would care. Her hands shook, but not from fear alone. She looked at him then, eyes burning. They were wrong. Daniel drew a slow breath, nodding. Yes, they were. Silence fell again, thick and sharp. Then Elena spoke words he hadn't expected. I want to go with you when you hunt them. Daniel's head snapped toward her. No. The answer came hard, immediate. Tracking men like that isn't for healing, Elena. It's for justice. And justice can be ugly, violent. I won't put you in that danger. I'm already in danger, she said firmly. Her voice no longer wavered, it carried steel. "Every night I see them, every day I live in their shadow. That is danger. The only way to end it is to face them, to show them they didn't destroy me." Daniel stared at her, torn between fury at the thought and admiration at the fire in her eyes. She was no longer the broken figure he had found in the mesquite grove. He leaned forward, voice low, almost pleading. "If you come, you follow my lead. No arguments. These men are killers." Elena nodded solemnly. "I understand, but I won't hide anymore." The flames snapped in the hearth, sparks spiraling upward. And in their glow, Daniel saw it plain. The woman before him was not just a victim. She was gathering her strength, and soon she would walk into the storm at his side. The morning they left the cabin, the valley lay silver with dew, the air sharp and cool. Daniel tightened the cinch on his gelding while Elena stood a step away, her borrowed dress tucked beneath a blanket cloak, her dark eyes fixed on the horizon. For the first time since he'd met her, she wasn't trembling. "You sure?" Daniel asked quietly. She lifted her chin. "I won't turn back." They rode out slow, following the trail north. At first, Elena clung stiffly to the saddle, her body still raw with pain. But mile after mile, she straightened, her gaze scanning the ground the way she had once searched for healing herbs. By mid-morning, Daniel dismounted and knelt in the dust. "See here," he said, brushing aside mesquite leaves. "Prints, heavy, 3 horses, moving fast." Elena crouched beside him, studying the marks. "They came this way?" He nodded. "Not running, but not slow either, means they felt safe. Men like that think no one will follow." His mouth tightened. They were wrong. She traced the edge of a hoofprint, her fingers steady. "The earth remembers," she murmured, almost to herself. Daniel watched her, struck by the quiet reverence in her touch. "That's right. The ground tells a story if you know how to listen." He showed her how the broken twigs pointed north, how scat revealed the horse's condition, how depth of the prints told weight. At first she asked questions hesitantly, afraid of mistakes. But as the hours passed, her voice grew more certain, her eyes sharper. She pointed to a bent stalk of grass, to the faint line where a horse's tail had dragged. Daniel found himself nodding, pride stirring against his caution. By afternoon, they reached a dry creek bed where the prints scattered across the sand. Elena frowned, biting her lip. "They split?" "Not split," Daniel said, squinting. He showed her the overlap of hoof marks, the confusion meant to throw off anyone who followed. "They tried to hide their trail, means they know they left something behind worth covering." Elena's gaze hardened. "Then we follow harder." He almost smiled. This was not the broken girl he had lifted onto his horse days ago. This was someone learning the desert's language, turning pain into sharpness. As evening fell, they made camp near a stand of cottonwoods. Daniel built a small fire, while Elena gathered sage leaves, crushing them between her palms. The scent rose sharp and clean. "My grandmother said, 'Sage clears fear,'" she said softly, feeding the leaves into the flames. "I need that tonight." Daniel settled across from her, the fire painting his face in gold and shadow. "You're stronger than you think, Elena. Most folks would have broken by now." Her eyes met his across the firelight, steady and unflinching. "I won't break, not until they pay." Daniel held her gaze a long moment, then nodded. He saw it plain. The desert had not taken her spirit. It was shaping it into steel. Red River Station smelled of whiskey and horses, a place where men came to forget the law. Daniel kept close to Elena as they walked the boardwalk, his hand never far from the cult at his side. Heads turned. Some stared with open curiosity, others with hostility. Inside the saloon, the noise dulled for a heartbeat when Elena entered. A pair of cowhands at the bar smirked and muttered just loud enough. "Savage girl," one said, his laughter cutting sharp. "Guess they'll take anything in these parts." Elena froze. The words slammed into her harder than any blow. For weeks she had carried herself forward, step by trembling step, believing she was reclaiming what they stole. But here, in the sneers of strangers, the old shame flooded back. Her hands shook, her breath quickened. "They will never see me as more than that," she thought. Maybe the men were right. Daniel caught her arm, steadying her before she stumbled. He steered her outside, away from the choking laughter. In the alley, she leaned against the wall, trembling. "It doesn't matter," she whispered, tears spilling hot. "I can track them for 100 miles. I can sing every prayer my grandmother taught me. And still, I am nothing but a savage to them." Daniel's chest tightened. He wanted to rage at the world, to silence every cruel tongue. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather journal, its cover worn smooth. "I've been keeping record," he said quietly, "not of them, of you." She looked at him through blurred eyes. He opened the book, showing neat lines of script. Day 12, she spoke without flinching when I approached. Day 18, she told me about her grandmother's healing songs. Day 23, she stood tall when a merchant tried to cheat her. He flipped more pages, his voice steady. "Every day you've grown stronger, Elena, stronger than most could ever hope to be." She took the journal with shaking hands, eyes moving over the words. Each entry was a mirror she had never seen, a reflection not of brokenness, but of resilience. Slowly, her breathing steadied. Daniel's voice softened. "I know the world can be cruel, but listen to me. We don't walk this trail for vengeance. We walk it for justice. The prophet Micah said, 'What does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God.' That's the road I aim to follow, and I believe it's the road you're on too." Elena closed the book, pressing it to her chest. The words of the sneering cowhands still stung, but Daniel's record stood taller, more solid than their scorn. For the first time since stepping into town, she lifted her head. "They won't define me," she said quietly. "Not anymore." Daniel met her gaze, pride stirring in his chest. "Good, because the trail ahead is only going to get harder, and I need you strong." Elena nodded, resolve hardening once more. "Then let's find them." The journey to explore the Wild West is still long. Subscribe to hear more true stories. If you're still watching, drop a 1 in the comments. Bitter Creek squatted in the desert like a wound that never healed. Its main street was little more than dust and warped planks, lined with buildings leaning against each other as if too tired to stand alone. A crooked saloon sign creaked in the wind, and the smell of sour whiskey and horse dung clung to the air. Daniel reined in his horse at the edge of town. He felt the change immediately. This was a place where decent folks didn't linger. He glanced at Elena, who sat tall behind him, her face calm but her hands clenched in the folds of her cloak. "You don't have to stay close once we're in there," he murmured, "but no matter what happens, you keep your eyes forward. Don't give them the satisfaction of seeing you afraid." She nodded once, though he caught the tremor in her breath. Together they rode down the street, every hoofbeat drawing stares. A ranch hand leaned against the hitching rail, spitting into the dirt. His gaze locked on Elena, and his smirk widened. "Look here, boys," he drawled to his companions. "Another brave soul bringing his squaw to town." Laughter broke out, sharp and ugly. Elena stiffened. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he didn't take the bait. Instead, he guided the horse past, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "Ignore it. They don't matter." But the stares kept coming, hard eyes from doorways, whispers from the boardwalk. An old woman tugged her child aside as they passed, muttering something Elena couldn't catch. Shame pricked her chest, hot and bitter, until she wanted to shrink into nothing. Daniel dismounted at the saloon and helped her down, his hand steady on her arm. When she hesitated, he leaned close, his voice steady as stone. "Stand tall, Elena. You have every right to walk this street. If anyone has a problem with that, they answer to me." His certainty steadied her more than she expected. Together they stepped into the saloon, where the air hung thick with tobacco smoke and stale beer. The piano fell silent, and a dozen pairs of eyes turned their way. The bartender sneered, "We don't serve Indians here." Daniel's gaze never wavered. He rested his hand on the bar, his other near his revolver. "She's not asking for your hospitality," he said calmly. "We're asking questions, that's all." The room stayed quiet, the tension stretched thin. Daniel didn't look away, didn't flinch. Slowly, the bartender's eyes flicked to the Colt at his hip, then back to Daniel's face. He swallowed, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Questions, then," he muttered, "but make it quick." Daniel guided Elena to a corner table. The murmur of voices resumed, but softer now, edged with curiosity. Elena's shoulders remained tight, but she held her head higher, her gaze fixed on the fire in the hearth. Bitter Creek had welcomed them with contempt, but they were inside now. The trail had led them here, and there was no turning back. The stable smelled of hay and sweat, dim light filtering through warped boards. The owner, a wiry man with grease-stained hands, barely glanced up as Daniel led Elena inside. "Looking for 3 riders," Daniel said evenly. "One older, gray in the beard. Other 2 younger, one red-haired, one jumpy." The man's brush stilled on the hoof he was cleaning. "Plenty of riders pass through." Daniel crouched, picking up a discarded horseshoe. "These men rode a black horse with white stockings. Heavy set. You shot it?" The stableman's jaw tightened. He set the hoof down and turned away. "Maybe I did. Don't mean I know anything about 'em." Daniel studied him a moment, then set a coin on the stall rail. The man's eyes flicked to it, then away. "They paid in silver," he muttered finally. "Odd kind, not from around here. Big spenders. That's all I'll say." Back on the street, Elena pulled her cloak tighter. "He was lying," she whispered. Daniel nodded grimly. "Scared, more like. Folks here know better than to cross men with money behind them." Their next stop was the general store. A clerk with spectacles too large for his face fussed over bolts of cloth until Daniel pressed him with the same questions. At the mention of silver coins, the clerk hesitated, adjusting his glasses nervously. "They came through 2 weeks back, bought ammunition, dried meat, spoke loud, like they wanted folks to hear, boasted about good fortune." He leaned in, lowering his voice. "Didn't seem like the sort of fortune a man earns honest." Elena's stomach twisted. She remembered their laughter, the way they'd spoken of her suffering as if it were entertainment. She bit hard on the inside of her cheek, forcing herself not to falter. Daniel thanked the clerk, then guided her toward the laundry behind the saloon. A woman waited there, worn from too many nights and too many men. Her painted smile faltered when she saw Elena. "You're asking about those 3, she said quietly, before Daniel could speak. "They were here, loud, cruel, threw money like they'd struck gold." Her expression hardened. "Bragged about teaching an Apache girl her place. Made me sick, the way they laughed." Elena's breath caught, her vision blurred, but she forced the words out. "They were paid?" Mary nodded, glancing around. "Said some man with silver lined their pockets. Talked about a bigger job coming. Didn't say who, but they weren't acting alone." The alley fell silent, save for the drip of water from the eaves. Elena leaned against the wall, trembling. It wasn't random. Someone wanted this done. Daniel's fists clenched, the muscles in his jaw taut as iron. Which means we're not just hunting 3 men. We're stepping into something larger. And whoever's behind it, his eyes burned with cold resolve. They'll answer for it too. They made camp outside town, in a hollow where mesquite trees bent low against the wind. The firelight flickered over Daniel's face, carving hard lines into the weary planes of his features. Elena sat opposite, her knees drawn close, eyes shadowed as though the flames themselves could not reach her. For a long time, neither spoke. Then Elena whispered, "It wasn't random." Daniel's gaze lifted to hers, steady. No, someone paid them. Her hands clenched in her lap. "But why me? I was only gathering herbs. I'm no warrior, no council voice." "You are your grandmother's blood," Daniel said quietly. "She was more than a healer. She kept peace alive when others wanted war. Without her, those talks already hang by a thread." He poked the fire, sparks rising into the night. "Hurting you would send a message. Fear spreads faster than bullets." Elena's throat tightened. "You mean they wanted my people to strike back, to kill in anger?" He nodded. "And when they do, white politicians in Austin or Washington will call it savagery. They'll demand soldiers, contracts for rifles." Land opened for settlement. Plenty of men stand to profit if peace fails. The truth settled heavy between them. Elena felt it pressing on her chest, squeezing until her breath came shallow. "Then we are nothing," she said bitterly. "Just pieces in their game. One girl's pain means nothing to them, except as fuel for more hate." Daniel's eyes hardened, but his voice stayed low. "Don't believe that. You mean something, Elena. You've survived what they meant to break you with. That makes you dangerous to them." She looked up, startled. "Dangerous?" He leaned forward, firelight catching the steel in his eyes. "Because you're proof they didn't win. If the truth of what they did comes out, if people see you standing, speaking, they can't hide behind politics or money. Their lie collapses." Elena stared into the flames, the weight of his words pressing against her despair. Could her brokenness truly carry any power against men who shaped nations? Her grandmother's voice stirred faint in her memory. Healing begins when truth is spoken without fear. The silence stretched, filled only by the crackle of mesquite wood. Then Elena whispered, almost to herself, "If truth is my weapon, then I must use it." Daniel gave a single nod. "Then we'll find them, together, and when the time comes, the world will hear your voice." Above them, the stars burned cold and distant, yet for the first time since Bitter Creek, Elena felt a spark of warmth inside her chest, something like defiance, something like hope. The fire burned low, leaving only embers that pulsed like a heartbeat in the dark. Elena sat with her arms wrapped around herself, her face hidden in shadow. She hadn't spoken for some time, and Daniel sensed the storm brewing inside her was fiercer than any they'd seen in the sky. At last her voice broke the silence, rough and uneven. "What if they're right?" Daniel turned, brow furrowed. "Who?" "The men, the ones in town, the ones who—" Her breath hitched, but she forced the words through clenched teeth. "They said I was nothing but a savage, worthless, that no one would believe me. And when I heard those cowhands laughing, I thought, maybe it's true. Maybe I will never be whole again. Maybe I will always be broken." The words hung between them like ash. Daniel felt them cut deeper than any knife, but he refused to let silence swallow them. He shifted closer, keeping his voice steady and low. "Elena, I've watched you every day since that night. I've seen you fight through fear, learn to track men who thought they were untouchable, stand taller than the hate thrown at you. Broken? No." He shook his head firmly. "You are stronger than anyone I know." She looked at him, eyes shining in the firelight, doubt still heavy in her gaze. Daniel drew a slow breath, the memory of his mother's voice echoing through years of loss. "My mama used to tell me a verse when I doubted myself, from the Gospel of John. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." He held Elena's gaze. "The truth is, those men are liars. The truth is, you are not what they called you. And the truth will free you from their chains, not bind you to them." Elena's lips trembled. For a long moment, she said nothing, as though testing the weight of his words against the crushing burden inside her. Then she whispered, "And if I speak that truth, before them, before everyone, will it really free me?" Daniel's eyes softened. "It already has. Every step you've taken since that grove, every mile on this trail, every word you've spoken tonight, it's proof you are more than what they tried to make you. When you speak before them, it won't just be for yourself. It will be for every woman they silenced, every voice they tried to bury." Elena's breath shuddered out, a release of something long held. She looked into the fire, and for the first time, her eyes didn't reflect only fear. There was resolve there, fragile but real. Daniel reached across the space, not touching her, but letting his hand rest near hers on the ground. "Hold to the truth, Elena. That's your freedom, and it's what will carry us through the reckoning ahead." She nodded slowly, her shoulders straightening, as if the truth itself had settled into her bones. The trail led them to a ramshackle saloon on the edge of Deadwood Gulch, a place where windows sagged on broken hinges and lantern light bled through cracks in the boards. Daniel pulled his horse to a halt, his gut twisting with certainty before he even saw inside. Through a grimy window, 3 figures sat at a corner table. The gray-bearded leader leaned back in his chair, scars on his hands catching the lamplight as he raised a glass. The red-haired youth threw his head back in laughter, freckles glowing ruddy under the haze of smoke. The third man, thin, nervous, kept darting glances at the door, as though expecting pursuit. Elena's breath caught. Her body went rigid, memories crashing down with merciless force. She clutched the edge of her cloak, fighting the urge to run. "It's them," she whispered, voice raw. "It's them." Daniel studied her face, reading the war behind her eyes. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "I can go in alone." Her gaze flicked to him, and for a heartbeat he saw the same terror he'd witnessed that first night in the mesquite grove. But then, slowly, something shifted. She straightened, her trembling hands steadied, and fire lit in her eyes. "No," she said, voice firming. "They took my peace, but not my spirit. I will not hide while they laugh." Daniel felt a surge of respect so fierce it bordered on awe. He gave a single nod. "Then we go together." They tied their horses at the hitching rail. Daniel's hand hovered near his colt, every muscle taut with readiness. Elena walked at his side, her head high, though he could see her throat working with each breath. Inside, the saloon buzzed with drunken talk until the door creaked open. Conversation faltered as patrons turned to watch the newcomers. The 3 men at the corner table barely glanced up until Elena stepped fully into the lamplight. The gray-bearded man froze mid-drink, his eyes narrowing in recognition. The redhead smirked, though unease flickered across his face. The nervous youth paled, his hand trembling as it hovered near his glass. Elena's heart thundered, but she forced her voice clear and steady. "You remember me," she said, her words slicing through the silence. You thought I would vanish into the dust, but here I stand." The bearded man's lips curled in a sneer. "Don't know what you're talking about, girl." Elena took a step closer, her gaze unwavering. "You do. You took my peace, but you did not take my spirit. And tonight, the truth will be heard." A murmur rippled through the saloon, men shifting uneasily on their stools. Daniel moved closer to her side, his presence solid as iron. The air was heavy, waiting to break. And in that charged moment, everyone in the room knew the reckoning had come. The silence inside the saloon stretched taut, broken only by the hiss of a lantern. All eyes fixed on Elena as she stood tall, the fire in her gaze stronger than the trembling in her hands. "You left me in the dearth at Willow Creek," she said clearly, her voice carrying to every corner. "You thought no one would care about one Apache woman, but tonight every man here will know the truth." The red-haired youth shifted uncomfortably. The nervous one fumbled his glass, spilling whiskey down his shirt. The bearded leader barked a harsh laugh, rising to his feet. "She's lying, just a squaw making up stories for attention." Daniel's hand hovered near his Colt, his voice low and even. "Careful, friend. There are plenty of witnesses here. Best you think before you speak." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Rough men, used to looking the other way, now found themselves staring at the trembling woman who refused to break. Some looked uneasy, others angry, not at her, but at the men who dared treat her as less than human. Elena stepped forward, her chin high, though her knees ached with fear. "They took what was not theirs. They mocked me. They said no one would believe me. Will you believe me now?" Her words cracked, but they rang with raw truth. The nervous youth broke first. His voice quavered, desperation spilling out. "It wasn't my idea. Tom said it would be fun, said nobody would care if we... He stopped, face white as chalk, the weight of his confession echoing in the stunned silence. Gasps filled the room. Men muttered curses under their breath. The saloon keeper stepped forward, shotgun in hand. "If that's true, you picked the wrong town to crawl into. We don't stomach that kind of filth here." The bearded leader's face twisted with rage. "Shut your mouth, you coward," he snarled, and in a flash his hand darted beneath his coat. Steel glinted in the lamplight as he lunged, knife aimed straight for Elena. The world snapped into motion. Daniel's Colt cleared leather in a blur, the crack of gunfire shattering the hush. The leader staggered mid-stride, knife clattering to the floor as he collapsed, lifeless at Elena's feet. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then chairs scraped, boots thundered. Rough hands seized the two surviving men, shoving them against the wall. The saloon keeper's voice rang out like a gavel. "These two stand for trial. This town will see justice done." Elena stood frozen, staring at the body on the floor. Her breath came hard and fast, but not from fear. Slowly, she lifted her gaze to Daniel. Tears welled, but this time they were not born of terror. "It's over," Daniel said softly, holstering his revolver. "They can't hurt you anymore." Her shoulders sagged with release, a weight she had carried for too long finally lifting. For the first time since that grove of mesquite, Elena felt the stirrings of peace. If you like this video, please comment number 9. If you don't like it, please comment number 0. And please leave a comment and share your feelings. The saloon emptied slowly, men filing out into the night, their boots crunching against the dirt road. Some shook their heads, muttering about justice long overdue. Others cast quiet glances at Elena, no longer with contempt, but with a weight Daniel had rarely seen in frontier eyes: respect. The body of the bearded leader had already been hauled away. The two surviving men sat bound in the corner, guarded by townsfolk who only hours before might have ignored their sins. Now they stood watch with hard eyes, unwilling to let cruelty slip back into shadow. Elena remained by the hearth, her hands clasped tightly around the journal Daniel had given her days earlier. She hadn't spoken since the gunshot, but her silence felt different now, no longer a prison, but a slow unfolding. Daniel approached carefully, as he always had with her, his steps quiet against the warped planks. "You did it," he said softly. Her head lifted. In her eyes lingered the sheen of tears, but not of despair. They glimmered with something else: release. "I spoke," she whispered, voice unsteady but alive. "They heard me, and this time they believed." Daniel's chest tightened. He wanted to reach for her hand, but held back, letting the space between them remain hers to cross. "That's the power of truth," he said gently. "It doesn't just break chains, it builds something stronger in their place." For the first time since he had found her in the mesquite grove, Elena's lips curved in the faintest echo of a smile. "I thought I would never feel light again," she admitted, "like the storm would never pass. But tonight, when I saw him fall, when I heard the crowd, it was as if the shadows loosened their grip." She drew a breath, steady and full. "It feels like freedom." They stepped outside into the cool night. The storm that had threatened earlier had passed, leaving the sky washed clean, stars sharp and countless above the desert horizon. Bitter Creek itself was quiet, as though the town, too, held its breath after what had transpired. Elena tilted her face to the heavens, her cloak falling back to reveal hair still damp from sweat and rain. "My grandmother used to say that healing comes like dawn," she murmured, "slow at first, then all at once." Daniel glanced at her, the firelight of the saloon behind them casting a soft glow on her profile. "She was a wise woman," he said, "and I think she'd be proud of you tonight." Elena's throat tightened, but she nodded, eyes fixed on the horizon. "For the first time, I think I might be proud of myself." They walked together toward the edge of town where their horses waited. The night air was cool, carrying the faint scent of mesquite and sage. Daniel saddled his mount in silence, giving Elena the space to breathe in her newfound peace. At length she spoke again, voice low. "You kept your promise, Daniel. You said they'd face justice. Tonight they did." She paused, turning toward him. "But you gave me more than that. You gave me the strength to face them myself." His gaze met hers, steady and warm. "All I did was stand beside you. The courage was always yours." Her eyes lingered on his a moment longer, something unspoken passing between them, something fragile yet unbreakable. In that silence there was no need for further words. As they mounted their horses and turned toward the open desert, the future stretched uncertain before them. But for the first time, it did not seem like a burden. It shimmered with possibility, carried on the night wind like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. The desert stretched wide and silent as they left Bitter Creek behind. Hoofbeats drummed a steady rhythm on the hard earth, each step carrying them farther from the saloon's smoke and whispers, farther from the shadow of the men who had tried to break her. Dawn was climbing over the horizon, painting the mesas in soft rose and gold. The air was cool, sweet with sage, as though the land itself had been washed clean. Daniel glanced over his shoulder. Elena rode with her shoulders straight, her gaze fixed on the rising light. For a time, neither spoke. The quiet between them was not heavy, but gentle, like the silence after prayer. At last, Elena broke it. "When you found me," she said slowly, "I asked you to make it quick. I wanted the pain to end." She turned her eyes toward him. But now I want the days ahead, all of them." Daniel felt a knot tighten in his throat. He nodded once, his voice low. "That's the bravest thing I've heard you say yet." They rode on, the sun lifting higher. After a while, Elena asked, "And what of you, Daniel Morrison? Where does your road lead, now that your promise is kept?" He thought a long moment before answering. "For years, I've lived like a man with nothing left. Out here, with only my horse and the land. But standing beside you these weeks, I've begun to wonder if the Lord wasn't leading me towards something more." Elena's brow furrowed gently. "You speak of faith often, even when everything around you was loss." Daniel exhaled, eyes on the horizon. "I've lost family, friends, even hope for a time, but I've never lost the Lord's hand guiding me. Romans says, we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. Maybe this, us crossing paths, was part of that purpose." Her eyes softened, shimmering in the dawnlight. "Perhaps. My grandmother taught me that the Creator heals not just through herbs, but through the people He places in our lives. Maybe you were sent as an answer I did not know how to pray for." The words settled between them like a vow unspoken. For a while they rode in silence, each carrying the weight of it with reverence. As the desert brightened, Elena drew a long breath. "I must return to my people, Daniel. They will need to hear the truth, not just of what was done to me, but of what justice looked like tonight. It could mean hope for peace again." He nodded. "And I'll see you there safely." She tilted her head, studying him. "And after?" Daniel managed a faint smile. "After, we'll see what road the Lord lays before us. I'm not a man to rush His timing." A soft laugh escaped her lips, the first he had heard from her that carried no bitterness. "Then I will not rush it either." They crested a rise, and before them the land unfurled vast and unbroken, touched by the first full rays of morning. Elena slowed her horse, lifting her face to the warmth. "The shadows feel far behind now," she said quietly. "And ahead, it looks like light." Daniel looked at her, the glow of dawn catching in her dark hair, and felt something stir deep in his chest, something like peace, something like promise. He whispered, almost to himself, "Yes, light enough for both of us." And together, side by side, they rode toward the horizon, where the day was just beginning. Stories like Daniel and Elena's are more than tales of survival. They are windows into the human spirit that shaped the frontier. For many of us, their journey echoes our own memories of loss and healing, of promises kept, of the quiet strength found in faith. We remember loved ones who stood by us in the hardest seasons, or moments when hope returned after long nights of despair. These are not just legends, they are true Wild West stories that remind us of courage, justice, and grace in the dust of history. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to walk with us further. Share your thoughts, recall your own memories, and join a community that believes in the enduring power of hope and compassion. Subscribe so you won't miss the next story that may stir something deep within your soul.